Oh man, welcome to the front porch. You've joined my brother Tony Carter, Lewis Love, and myself, Thabiti, Anya Wheeler. And today we're talking about 2008 Book of the Year on Preaching by Preaching Magazine. And that's Dr. Robert Smith's Doctrine That Dances. Dr. Smith's a good brother. He's a professor of divinity and preaching at Beeson Divinity School, and an exceptional preacher himself. And so we wanted to get some time talking about this book and talking by extension about preaching. And so let me ask you brothers, just sort of right off the bat, what was your main takeaway from the book? What did the book leave you with when you sort of go, what was that for you?
I'm first?
Yeah.
Okay, well, I think good, sharp preparation for preaching. I was challenged in that. Spending quality time and a quantity of time preparing. There's no substitute for good, solid preparation to preach. He made that so clear. No matter what he said, I'm almost in every chapter, he always talked about, he always emphasized preparation. And that was challenging. It was challenging, it was refreshing.
What about you, Tom?
You know, I was really encouraged and reminded and challenged to know once again that there is not a necessary dichotomy between intelligent and experiential preaching. That intelligent preaching needs to be experiential, but experiential preaching needs to be intelligent.
Right.
And I was really encouraged how through the whole of the book, I think that was a theme that Dr. Smith was really bringing out and bringing to the forefront of his readers, that your preaching needs to be experiential, that your people need to experience the story that is the scriptures, but at the same time, that story needs to be an intellectually stimulating and a biblically consistent story. And I was really encouraged by that.
Now, the book is Doctrine That Dances.
Yeah.
Right. And he's talking about doctrinal preaching.
That's right.
So how would you brothers think of doctrinal preaching? How did he define it? How would you guys define it? What's the notion there?
I think he defined it as preaching that is driven by the doctrine in the text.
Sure.
You know, and so his point, which was really rich, is that you need to gather from the text what is the central doctrine of that text, and then that needs to drive the proclamation of the text. And coming out of tradition like we have and like Dr. Smith has, oftentimes doctrine didn't drive the proclamation. Doctrine didn't drive the understanding of the text. But he just wanted to make sure that before you get to the dance, make sure that it's the doctrine that you're dancing with, the doctrine that is in that text, and make sure that you are saying what the text says, in its context.
That's good.
Right.
And I thought that was really rich.
He used a phrase to get you to pull the doctrine out. You're an exegetical escort. So and that would get you then to the doctrinal dance, but you can't get there unless you are escorted there by exegesis. And so
Good stuff, man.
What's
the dance?
I think the dance is the experience that Carter was talking about, the experiential piece of it, where feelings. That was important to Dr. Smith, where feelings come into play. That you don't separate yourself or the doctrine from how you feel. As a matter of fact, if it's good doctrine, if it's right doctrine, you're gonna feel it. You ought to feel it, and that feeling should be expressed in your preaching. It doesn't necessarily drive the preaching. The doctrine does that, but if it's solid doctrine, then you're going to feel it. You're going to feel it. That's the dance.
Well, and what's the relationship between those two things? I mean, is there an order to doctrine and feeling? Is there a priority of one or the other? I mean, how are those things connected?
I think like Lou was saying, that there's this exegetical escort. You know, that again, the doctrine is driving. It is driving and undergirding the proclamation.
So it's primary in that sense.
It's primary in that sense. But it's never an end in of itself.
The doctrine.
The doctrine isn't.
Right.
You know, that you really haven't completed the preaching experiment, the preaching experience, until you have actually gotten your people to dance to the doctrine that they're hearing.
Now, in that sense, is Smith arguing, would you argue that the doctrine from the text, derived from the text, should also then determine the particular feelings that are in response to the doctrine?
Yeah.
Is that, I mean, is that right? I mean,
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, because again, he stressed exegesis, right? Proper exegesis. He stressed getting to the right doctrine, and then I think he kind of took for granted a little bit that if you do that, then the feeling is going to be right, or experience is going to be right. It seemed like he was flipping the switch on how preaching is mostly done in the traditions that we come out of.
Right.
You run right to the feeling.
Right.
Right, and the feeling has no basis; it has no substance, and so that makes it counterfeit. And so that's why he stressed the exegetical piece that would move you to the dance. But then on the other side of that whole thing is then there are those in some other traditions that stress the doctrine, that turn it into a dry experience. You know, we were teaching this and you understand this, but it does not really move from your head to your heart to where you feel it. So he was kind of getting at both of those extremes
I think he
of
was.
preaching.
Yeah.
significant difference between lecture and preaching.
Right.
Sure.
Yeah.
Part of it is where the affections come in and how the affections are moved. How would doctrinal preaching differ from expositional preaching? We hear so much about exposition today. How would those two differ, or do they differ?
You know, I wouldn't think that they necessarily have to differ all that much, because I'm going to understand expositional preaching as really, in a nutshell, you're saying what the text says. I think doctrinal preaching is really just getting the doctrine that the text is proclaiming. That text says something about God. You know, that text says something about humanity, you know, and that text says something about Christ. And so you're trying to dig out all of those. Exposition is really, you know, bringing all those out. And doctrinal preaching is just that. You know, it's bringing those glorious doctrines out.
I don't think he drew a difference between the two. And in fact, when I was reading it, I know he kept saying doctrine, but when I was reading, I was thinking exposition. That's what I was thinking.
It's interesting, and because good doctrinal preaching, and I love that phrase, the exegetical escort, should also, we should arrive at our doctrines exegetically. By digging into the text, what the text says. But now, getting back to the preparation, and maybe we'll sort of wind down here with two questions. Getting back to the preparation for a moment. To do doctrinal preaching well, it seems to me, assume something. It assumes that actually the preacher has a good doctrinal background coming to the text. I mean, is that part of the preparation, or am I out in left field there?
I think we would assume that.
Okay. No, because I'm saying we have this conversation. And it seems like you say, okay, doctrinal preaching, we all go check. Connects with the heart, we all go check. It's driven by the text, we all go check. And I'm just left wondering, okay, if the preacher doesn't have a good background or understanding of systematic theology, or even historical and biblical theology, you know, they may not. And this is a question. I'm putting it in form of a statement, but I'm making it really as a question. Would they have the sort of necessary categories to do doctrinal preaching well? And if they don't, if a preacher's out there and they go, well, I don't know anything about systematic theology, or you know, what is that even? Where should they start? What should we do?
Well, one of the things that I really enjoyed in reading the book was Dr. Smith's emphasis almost on biblical theology. And how he just kept emphasizing the meta-narrative that is in the Bible, and how the history, the story of redemption through Jesus Christ is to be pulled out as you work your way through any text of the Bible, that there is a story there, he said. There's a story there, and that story is Jesus. you know, and you need to be always seeking to put your people in that story, in the context that that passage plays.
Sure.
In
Yeah.
that overall story.
Yeah.
And I think that undergirds him. So you would think that in that, there is a responsibility for the preacher to have some type of understanding of that meta-narrative already, that biblical theological perspective, that systematic theological perspective, as he comes to that text and be able to pull out what that text says.
Systematics probably would have been a good prequel
Yeah.
to the book,
Yeah.
especially from Dr. Smith, because people listened to him. So that would, but because I can't direct, I can't plan his life, but that would have been great.
Yeah.
Excellent.
Yeah.
I think there's certain things that people do need to understand and know prior to even looking at the text.
So you not only recommend the book, you're planning his next book.
Plan his next book.
All right.
Yeah. Which probably should have been the first one.
Yeah.
Well, it's like the Star Wars thing, right?
There
Now
you
we'll
go.
go back and
There we
write the
go.
beginning of it.
That's right, man.
There
The
you go.
prequel. The prequel.
That's it.
Prequel,
That's right.
That's it. We're on the front porch.
That's right,
This is
man.
where people's lives get planned.
That's right. That's right. But there was one thing I did
Yeah.
want to mention before we shut it down was the next to the last chapter. I think that chapter in itself is worth the book.
Wow.
Yeah.
He likens preaching and the feeling of it to jazz,
Yeah,
right? And
yeah. Improvisation.
listen, man, improvisation, man.
Yeah,
You know what it
jazz.
made me do? Because you know, you call what I listen to, not jazz.
That's right. Kenny
You know.
G stuff ain't
And I don't listen to Kenny G.
Kenny
I don't
G.
listen to Kenny
Who
G,
you
man.
listen
Come on now.
You
You
don't
always
listen to
tell the
Kenny
truth.
G, man. I don't listen to Kenny G,
On
man.
the porch.
I don't listen to Kenny G, man. I don't listen. I don't listen to Kenny G. Let me think. So I'm not really that much. I don't know the guys' names, but okay. Boy, he just died too some years ago. He played the sax, and goodness, I can't say I'm not that good at this. Grover Washington. Thank you for that, Porch. That's when you people all us hanging on the banisters, talking all over our banisters and everything else. That's all right though. Grover Washington. See, you wouldn't call him a jazz artist, would you?
No, Grover's cool.
Would you call him
he
good?
wouldn't be my
Right.
preference.
So
yeah.
what I did, I went back, man, and picked up some. I went on YouTube and grabbed some classics because I wanted to
good,
hear
man.
the improvisation. I
Yeah.
wanted to hear the introduction, like he said, and then because they know that's why it was
That's right.
they know the material.
That's right.
So then they can improvise.
That's right.
Because they know it. And I listened for it on a couple of songs before we got here actually, and it was amazing. Yeah. It was
See,
nice.
jazz is about freedom in the groove.
Sure.
Right.
So the jazz musician is that person who has prepared,
It's prepared.
run their
Right.
chords, they're disciplined, they know the standards, and it's because of that discipline,
Yeah,
the
the
grooves,
move inside
that they can
the
do the
groove.
freedom.
Do the freedom,
And
yeah.
sort of go off in flights and come back and pick it right back up.
Yeah.
You know, and good preaching.
Good
Good preaching
preaching
does that.
does that.
But you gotta have the groove.
You gotta have the
You
groove.
gotta have the
You gotta
grooves,
the
yeah.
categories,
You gotta have
You gotta
systematic
categories, the systematic
and so on.
categories. Yeah.
Man.
Yeah.
So we all recommend.
Yeah,
I recommend.
Yeah,
Oh,
I do recommend it. I recommend it in a large part because his is a voice
Sure, that's right.
in preaching and from a tradition that is not widely recognized. And yet it is a voice that, even in reform circles,
Sure.
that reform people need to
Amen.
need to
Amen.
read and to hear.
Amen. So we would recommend not only the book, we recommend his preaching. So if you haven't heard Robert Smith,
Yeah, take
Yeah,
a
it's
listen
good,
to
yeah.
Dr. Smith.
It's quite a
Yeah,
treat.
take a listen to
Quite a
Dr.
treat.
Smith.
It is.
Amen.
Yes, it is.
So there it is, man. We want to recommend to anyone who's interested, if you're looking for a
Amen.
good book to read
book,
on
yeah.
preaching,
Yeah.
Doctrine That Dances by Dr.
Flat.
Robert Smith. Excellent stuff. These are conversations about biblical faithfulness in the African American church and beyond. Thank you for joining us on the Front Porch.